This video is about creating a document or working with a document at a very basic level in InDesign. So how to create a document. Now the first thing that I would do is I would create a folder, and that folder is where everything is going to go. So any images I'm going to work with need to come into that folder, and then also the document, the InDesign document, should also sit inside this document at this level. You can add other folders. You'll see inside here I have folders within folders, so you can organize it. But once your images are actually inside the InDesign document, don't rename any of these, don't move them around, otherwise you will break links. Now that's because all images, if I used, for instance, this image within my InDesign document, but it's only going to be linked into the document. And so if I left it on the desktop and then took my InDesign document off to the printers, this particular image will be missing. So it's very, very important. There is no embedding in InDesign. So it's very, very important that you get yourself organized and then be prepared. So I'm going to open up InDesign, and this is the interface that I get. Now it's just going to show me stuff that I did before, stuff I last opened, and what I want to do is I want to create a new document. And you'll get a selection: print, web, mobile phone. So it'll enable you to design for those shapes. And it's not that you can necessarily create an entire website, but you might do the user interface. You might create the actual layout design for an iPad or an iPhone or any other sort of device from within. So if I go to web, you'll see I'll get a selection of web type sizes. If I go to mobile, you'll see I've got iPads and all sorts of variations. There's the iPhone up there. So it will give me the space within to design. It doesn't allow you to create web design. It's not that sort of software. InDesign is principally designed as a print software. There is some interactivity in it, but in essence, it was designed for print, for magazines, for leaflets, for brochures, newsletters, and books, etc., newspapers. But of course, a similar thing might be useful for an online PDF, a newsletter that's going to be sent out with an email. So there are all sorts of interconnecting reasons why you might use InDesign. Now I'm just going to create an A4 document, and the main part of this video is really to talk you through what's going on here. So let's have a look around. So we have obviously the width and height of the document, the orientation, and the units that we're working in. If I'm working in, let's say, inches, now I'd be working in inches if I was working for an American organization. They may work in what's called imperial standards, so I may work in inches. But if I wanted to make a variation in size, you don't necessarily have to come in and know your inches. I'll show you that in a moment. In the UK, of course, you'll be using European standards, most likely, which will be millimeters, centimeters. But there are other types of measurements, most of which you'll probably never use. Pixels, you know about. Picas and points are possibilities. Perhaps more about those later. Right, now you decide how many pages you would like. I'm just going to make let's say a 4-page document. And you have over here something called facing pages. So if I leave it ticked and create that document, and then I'm just going to shrink the document down, you can see I've got a 4-page document, 2 of which are facing each other, hence the facing pages. Now that's because this is a cover and this would be the back, and then this would be the inside front, this would be the inside back, and it's what's known as facing pages. So I'm just going to get rid of this and go back to where we were. It's 4 pages, and I'm going to untick facing pages. Now if I shrink it down, you'll see there are my 4 pages. They no longer face, they're simply single pages that I can design literally underneath each other. This kind of design setup is more likely going to be used for leaflets and flyers, and in fact I'd probably only really need 2 pages for that, a front and a back for this kind of flyer. The other type of design, well, this is going to be for all of those things that you fold over. So it could be a folding leaflet, or it could be a magazine, newspaper, or any kind of pamphlet that you might want to create. So effectively this document could have many more pages. What you do need to respect is the fact that they have to be multiples of 4. So there has to be these inside pages, and there has to be outside pages. So everything really comes in multiples of 4. So the next set of pages I could make would be 8 pages for a magazine, or 12 pages for a magazine. You don't need to worry about the order of these. InDesign does all that for you. You simply design the magazine as if you're turning the pages. So let's say this was page 1 in the magazine, page 2, page 3, page 4, and it would carry on like that. So InDesign will do all that organization for you, and it will print out in the correct order when we send it to print. Okay, back to my new document. So we've decided on the units, the orientation, number of pages, facing pages. Under here you've got something called primary text frame. Now that's kind of quite advanced, and it's probably useful if you are working on a large publication or a long document. It might be very useful. I'm going to skip it at the moment. Columns, you can add columns at this stage, but we can also add columns later, which is the way that we'll be doing it. Now notice the space in between the columns. So if I did want to put in 2 or 3 columns, the space in between is governed by this number here, and it's described as a column gutter, which is contrary to the terminology that we were looking at last week. Gutters are reserved in newspaper language for the fold area, the spaces there, whereas in the columns, the spacing in between the columns is often known as the alleys. So this is just an example of how it's a little bit interchangeable. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to just stick with one. You have a margin. By default, the margin is, you can see it set at ½ inch here. If I decided I wanted, let's say, a 1 centimeter margin, and we're working in inches, I can actually go in and just say 1 centimeter. You make sure it's all locked together. That's a locking device. And then I'm just going to click away, and you'll see it's worked out that that's 0.3937 of an inch. So you can actually go in. InDesign lets you do this all over the place. You can go in, let's make it a little bit bigger again. Let's say 2 centimeters, 2 centimeters, and then it's going to give me 0.7874 of an inch. And it works the other way. If we were working in centimeters and someone gave me a margin that was in inches, I could put in the inch margin. InDesign will do the math for me. So the margins, at the moment are equal because we've got them locked together. But you are able to go in and address the top, the bottom, and notice this is the inside and the outside margin. So this will always be the margin facing inwards on a page, and this will always be the one facing outwards. So your margin is a guide, and I'm going to go into that separately. Now look at bleed and slug. By default, your bleed is locked together, but again, you can unlock it and you can distinguish how much of a bleed you need. I'm going to put in a 3mm bleed, 3mm for small publications, so for something that was an A5 document, or something like 5mm is normal for something nearing an A4 document. I'm going to keep them locked together. Again, we'll look at this separately. Something under here called a slug. Now I'm going to put in a slug of about 50 on the outside. And let's just have a look at what that actually does. Okay, so we have a margin sitting inside the document. We have the cutting edge, and we have the bleed edge, which is equidistant outside the document. So it's beyond the area that we really want to be designing for. And then in addition, you have this slug area here. The slug area is only really used when you want to create an area that's specifically for notes. So if I was working on a magazine and we were cross-referencing, I'm sending something to the editor to be signed off, and I want to write some notes, I've identified an area where we put notes. Or we might want to talk to the printer about very specific things. So it's an area where you can write information, ask questions and details, note details, so that our work colleagues can actually correspond with us on this document. Now the margin, which is this inner line, is only there as a guide. And it does help us so that if we bring in, for instance, text, let's say I put some text here, and then I have 10 other pages in which I want the viewer to have a comfortable experience as they move from page to page. We want the text to sit within the same area. So it just really helps as a design basic to sort out where that text will go. And it means that the text doesn't jump around from page to page, but it doesn't stop us from breaking this for design purposes, or to write a headline which goes almost from the edge of the paper to the other edge. Now, if we're working with images or even blocks of colour, and we want to take that block of colour right to the edge of the document, we have to remember that the way that a document is published will mean it will be printed on a larger piece of paper, and that paper is then cut. And we can end up with slight misprints, which means you end up with a tiny sliver of white and part of an image cut off where you don't want it cut off. So in order to prevent that from happening, it's very important that you use your bleeds. So file, place your image, and you can either bring it in like so. So I'm actually identifying the corner of the bleed and I'm drawing to the other edge. And then you must be prepared to lose part of that image. Okay, that will definitely be cut off in the final processes. So don't put in anything that's really, really important. The other way that, of course, you can bring in the image is you can draw the frame before you have the image. So that sits there ready, waiting for your image. And then when I go to File, Place, I have the frame selected, pick up the image, and it will put it in the size of the image, remember. So that's when you need to go to your frame fitting, and here I'm going to ask it to fill frame proportionally. Okay, that doesn't mean it's going to squish the entire image in. We're going to lose some of the image, but it will fill the frame proportionally. When you've created your document, don't forget to save it, and save it into that folder that you created for your exercise. So give it a name that you know you're going to remember. I'm going to call this my Seaside Brochure.